A young couple went on a small trip in their van, but they never returned home. When the police got involved in their search, they managed to find a number of rather troubling clues. However, they still could not get closer to solving this case. Soon, the relatives of the missing people began receiving mysterious letters that spoke of the fate of the vanished couple. But even that did not help investigators unravel this mystery. Only several decades later were they finally able to discover the truth about this case. Tanya van Cuylenborg was born on March 7th, 1969, in the Canadian city of Victoria. She grew up with her parents and an older brother with whom she was very close from childhood. Tanya loved animals, and during her school years she began thinking about becoming a veterinarian. In addition, she dreamed of traveling and seeing the world. In high school, Tanya went to Paris with her best friend. And after this trip, she finally decided that she wanted to dedicate some time to traveling to different countries as soon as she finished school. Shortly before graduation, when she was 18, Tanya met a young man named Jay Cook. They studied at the same school, but Jay was 2 years older than her. The couple began talking after he graduated, and soon they started dating. Even though Tanya wanted to become a veterinarian, she decided to postpone going to college in order to travel to different countries. After finishing school, she got a job at a cafe to save up enough money, and in her free time she often walked dogs. Jay also did not go to college after school and instead helped his father with their small family business installing heating systems. In November 1987, Jay's father received an urgent order. However, local suppliers did not have one of the key parts in stock. The nearest place to buy it was Seattle, in the U.S. state of Washington. The man decided that it would be faster to drive and get the part himself rather than order delivery. But at that time he had too much work, and he realized he simply could not fit it into his schedule. For this reason, he asked his son to go to Seattle instead, and Jay agreed. The young man wanted to help his father with the business, but mostly he liked the idea for another reason. He decided to invite Tanya along, knowing she would hardly refuse such a trip. At that time, they had been dating for about 6 months, but their relationship could not yet be called serious. Jay wanted to take it to the next level, and a trip together seemed to him like the perfect opportunity. As he expected, Tanya immediately agreed. They planned to leave Victoria in the morning, arrive in Seattle by evening, and return the next day. His father gave them the van and money so that Jay could book a hotel room for the night. However, the couple quickly decided they would save that money and just sleep in the van, stopping somewhere scenic. In addition, Jay's father gave him a check for $700 to buy the parts, plus several $100s in cash for other expenses. Although Seattle was not very far from Victoria geographically, the couple had to take 2 ferry rides, the first to cross into U.S. territory, and the second to get across the bay near Seattle. On the morning of November 18th, the couple got into the van and drove to their first ferry to reach Port Angeles. Their parents expected them to be home the next day, in the afternoon. But when that time came, Tanya and Jay still had not returned. Their relatives began worrying almost immediately because they knew the ferry schedule and understood that if the couple had taken the daytime ferry, they would already have been back home. Even so, they allowed for the possibility that Tanya and Jay had simply stayed somewhere longer, exploring new places and enjoying the scenery. But as time passed, and they still did not return. Tanya's parents called Jay's parents. By the second half of the day, both families were seriously considering that something bad had happened to them. The relatives still hoped that the couple had only decided to extend their trip, but Tanya and Jay never came home that day or the next morning. Their parents went to the police station to file a missing persons report. The police quickly accepted the missing persons report and began to gather information about the young couple's route. The first thing they checked was whether Tanya and Jay had taken the ferries. Investigators confirmed that the couple had indeed boarded the ferry to Port Angeles, but that was the last solid confirmation of their movements. Soon, troubling discoveries began to surface. Tanya's bank card was used to withdraw money in Seattle, but neither she nor Jay returned home. A few days later, police discovered the couple's van parked near downtown Bellingham, Washington. Inside, they found Tanya's wallet, her ID, and items of clothing, but there was no sign of Tanya or Jay themselves. This raised serious suspicions. If the couple had simply decided to extend their trip, why would their van be abandoned with personal belongings inside? Relatives began to fear the worst. Shortly afterward, Tanya's body was found in a ditch outside of Alger, Washington. She had been attacked and killed. Just days later, Jay's body was discovered under a bridge near Monroe, Washington. He, too, had been violently murdered. The case immediately shocked both Canada and the United States. The two young people had only wanted to take a short trip together, but their lives were cut short in the most brutal way. The police launched a large-scale investigation, but despite multiple suspects, leads, and even evidence, the killer managed to escape justice for decades. For years, the case went cold. Families of the victims never stopped pushing for answers. Tanya's brother and Jay's parents tirelessly contacted detectives, wrote letters, and demanded the case be reopened with every new forensic advancement. Finally, in 2018, with the rise of forensic genealogy and modern DNA techniques, investigators took a bold step. They uploaded the suspect's DNA profile, collected from crime scene evidence decades earlier, into genealogical databases. From there, genealogists worked backward, building out family trees and narrowing down possible suspects. The search eventually led to one man, William Earl Talbot II. He was arrested and later convicted of the murders of Tanya van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook. However, the local police department decided that there were not enough grounds to begin a full search. Tanya was 18 and Jay was 20, so officers said they might have just gone off on their own for a while and advised the parents to wait a few more days. Of course, such an answer did not satisfy the families. By then, Tanya's and Jay's parents were already 100% sure the couple would not have simply chosen to extend their trip for several days. First, Jay was supposed to deliver an important part to his father's client and had never shown irresponsibility in such serious matters before. Second, if they had really just decided to stay longer, they at least would have called their relatives from a payphone, of which there were plenty along their route. Tanya's father decided to begin searching on his own. First, together with Jay's parents, they learned that the kids had never picked up the part from the supplier. The man confirmed he had been waiting for them at the appointed time, but no one came. After this, Tanya's father drove along the route to Seattle, looking for any sign of them, but it brought no results. He didn't find Jay, Tanya, or the van. He did not plan to give up. He hired a private company and rented a helicopter with a pilot to survey the route from the air. But this too brought no answers. The area was mostly covered in dense forests, making it almost impossible to see anything. After that, Tanya's father printed leaflets with information about the missing couple and went to nearby towns, posting and handing them out in public places. For several days, the families did everything they could to find them. Eventually, the local police department finally began to take the case more seriously. Even so, they still believed Tanya and Jay might just be spending time together and would return home sooner or later. For that reason, they only contacted colleagues in Seattle, gave them the description of the van and the young couple, and asked patrol officers to keep an eye out. On November 24th, 5 days after the disappearance, a man was walking through the forest near a small town about 150 kilometers north of Seattle. As he passed along a road with a steep slope into the woods, he noticed something unusual under a tree. When he came closer, he realized it was a human body and called the police. Officers soon arrived and confirmed it was the body of a young woman. Her clothing was partially missing. Her hands were bound, and she had a gunshot wound to the head. Investigators quickly determined that she had been killed elsewhere, since there was almost no blood near the body. No documents were found with her, so police compared the description to missing persons reports. They quickly concluded that the victim matched Tanya van Cuylenborg. Her father came to the morgue and confirmed that the victim was indeed his daughter. Detectives now launched a full investigation, trying to establish the details of what had happened. They knew Tanya had been with 20-year-old Jay Cook, whose whereabouts was still unknown. Jay's van also had not been found. This led investigators to even briefly consider whether Jay might somehow be involved. The family strongly rejected this theory. They insisted Jay would never hurt Tanya. He had never shown aggression. He loved her deeply, and he did not own a firearm. Meanwhile, police received another call. A man in Bellingham, a city about 30 kilometers from where Tanya's body was found, had left a bar and noticed a wallet and keys on the ground. Opening the wallet, he found documents in Tanya van Cuylenborg's name. At first, he didn't contact the police, thinking the owner might return, so he left the items inside the bar. But soon he saw a TV news report about Tanya's murder and immediately called the authorities. Investigators searched around the bar and found plastic zip ties, the same kind used to bind Tanya's hands, as well as rubber gloves. Nearby, in a parking lot, they discovered the van, which had been abandoned. Inside was chaos, everything scattered and broken. However, detectives managed to collect important evidence, receipts that helped trace the couple's last stops, and a ferry ticket near Seattle, confirming they had indeed reached the city. They also noticed Tanya's camera was missing, which she had taken on the trip, suggesting the killer may have taken it. Forensic experts found a large amount of blood samples were sent to a Seattle lab, DNA analysis was still lab. Since no DNA database existed at the time, the identity of the third person could not be established. Still, this proved Jay was not responsible. Detectives stopped treating him as a suspect, but new questions arose. Was Jay still alive? And if not, where was he? The answer came the very next day, November 26th. A group of friends hunting near a river bridge saw a human body in the bushes and alerted police. It was confirmed to be Jay Cook. His body showed multiple abrasions, and the cause of death appeared to be strangulation. Based on the brutality of the crime, detectives considered that the killer might have known Jay personally or had specific motives. They speculated Jay may have been killed first, since his body was found closer to Seattle, and then Tanya was taken further north and killed later. Medical experts also found evidence of assault on Tanya's body. DNA tests confirmed it came from the same unknown male as the blood in the van. Still, his identity remained a mystery. Parallel to this, detectives worked to reconstruct the couple's route. Receipts and witnesses showed Tanya and Jay had first stopped in Port Angeles for food after their ferry ride, then continued toward Seattle. It seemed Jay may have missed a turn, as the next receipt placed them in a small town off the main route. A store clerk remembered them asking for directions to the ferry. She also recalled something strange. A man in a brown raincoat entered the store after them and left right behind them, as if following. Another receipt later placed them near Allen, Washington, where they bought a ferry ticket. Witnesses confirmed seeing them near that location. After that, the trail went cold. Investigators checked local offenders known for violence, but nothing matched. Even with the DNA evidence, they had no way to identify the killer. Detectives suspected this was not his first crime. The precision and cruelty suggested experience. They also believed he may have stalked the couple for some time before abducting them. Some thought the killer left Tanya's items and the gloves on purpose, taunting police, signaling that his use of gloves would prevent them from ever finding him. Forensics found fingerprints on the van that did not belong to Tanya or Jay, but since the suspect had worn gloves, detectives doubted they belonged to the killer. And with no database, they couldn't be matched. Although police had some leads, the investigation quickly ran into dead ends. Despite having DNA samples, there was no database in the 1980s to compare them against, leaving the identity of the unknown man a mystery. Detectives suspected that the killer was not new to violence. The way the crime was committed, careful, deliberate, and cruel, suggested he had experience. They also believed he had followed Tanya and Jay for some time before abducting them. The case eventually went cold. For decades, the families lived without answers. They never stopped pressing for justice. But there were no new developments. The DNA samples remained in evidence storage, waiting for technology to catch up. By the 1990s, DNA analysis had advanced, and investigators tried again to identify the unknown man's profile. But the technology was still too limited, and nothing conclusive came of it. Throughout the 2000s, the case sat dormant, remembered only by the families and a few persistent detectives. Everything changed in the 2010 with the rise of new forensic methods and genealogy databases. Cold case detectives revisited Tanya and Jay's case. The DNA collected from the van and from Tanya's body was finally tested with modern techniques, producing a usable genetic profile. Using investigative genetic genealogy, experts compared the unknown profile with open-source family trees. Slowly, they built out a family network, tracing the ancestry until they narrowed down to a specific suspect, William Earl Talbot II, a truck driver from Washington State. Talbot's name had never been at the top of the suspect list back in 1987, but DNA confirmed the connection. Detectives followed him, collected a discarded cup to obtain his DNA, and matched it directly to the crime scene evidence. In 2018, more than 30 years after Tanya and Jay's murders, police finally arrested Talbot. The evidence against him was overwhelming. In 2019, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. For Tanya and Jay's families, it was a bittersweet moment. Decades of pain and unanswered questions had finally come to an end. Justice had arrived, though far too late. Relatives of Tanya unexpectedly began receiving letters and postcards from someone claiming to be the perpetrator. In them, he confessed to what he had done, mocked the victims' families, and said that the police would never catch him. Investigators tried to track the sender, but in those years it was extremely difficult. All they managed to determine was from which cities the letters had been sent, but that information did not help to reveal his identity. Since then, letters continued to arrive regularly, most often on holidays. According to investigators, he wanted to bring even more suffering to Tanya's and Jay's relatives. Police also found that the letters came from different cities and states, meaning the author was traveling across the country. Still, they were not 100% sure the sender was truly the killer. In high-profile cases, it was not uncommon for impostors to torment families with fake letters, pretending to be the criminal. For many years, there was no real progress. Detectives continued to study possible suspects and did not rule out that the case could be the work of a serial killer. That suspicion was reinforced by the fact that 2 other couples had been abducted in the same region in recent years. However, the police could not find solid connections between these cases. Later, several serial killers active in the area were caught, but none were linked to Tanya's and Jay's murders. In 2003, the case was reopened, and detectives placed the killer's DNA profile into the FBI database. But there were no matches. Still, they believed the perpetrator must have had prior arrests or run-ins with the law. Perhaps he had been detained before criminals were required to submit DNA, or he had simply never been caught. Another unusual turn came in 2010, when Tanya and Jay's case was featured on a popular national TV program. Investigators received dozens of new tips. One caller claimed to recognize the letters that the victims' families had received. This man, living in Seattle, was investigated. It turned out he had traveled a lot around the country during those years, and the locations matched the postmarks on the letters. Detectives concluded he was indeed the sender of the letters, but not the killer. He was a disturbed individual who had no connection to the murders. His DNA did not match the killer's blood and biological samples. This confirmed that the letters were the work of a mentally ill man, not the real perpetrator. The case stalled again until 2018, when investigators learned about a company that created approximate portraits of criminals from DNA samples. They decided to try. Experts reconstructed the possible appearance of the killer at different ages, and police distributed the images in the media, hoping someone would recognize him, but no useful leads appeared. Still unwilling to give up, detectives turned to a new method: genetic genealogy. Experts uploaded the DNA into public genealogy databases, searching for distant relatives. Soon they found a possible cousin of the killer and studied her family tree. They focused on men who lived in or near Seattle in 1987 and were the right age. With the cousin's help, detectives identified the suspect, a man named William Talbot, in his 50s, living in the Seattle suburbs and working as a truck driver. Before arresting him, police had to confirm the DNA. They placed him under surveillance and a few days later retrieved a discarded coffee cup. DNA from the cup matched the killer's profile exactly. In May 2018, 30 years after the murders, William was arrested. He denied guilt, and the case went to trial. In 2019, his lawyers tried to argue that the DNA evidence could have another explanation. They claimed Tanya and William might have had consensual relations, and that prosecutors had no other strong evidence against him. But prosecutors countered. Fingerprints from 1987 found on the van, which had not matched Tanya or Jay, now matched William. Neighbors also testified that they had seen a brown van near William's house around that time, even though he did not own such a vehicle. Family members described him as aggressive, and most had long cut-off contact with him. None of them were surprised that he could have done such a crime. According to prosecutors, William tricked Tanya and Jay into giving him a ride. Once in Seattle, he used a gun to force them to drive to isolated areas. There, he killed them separately, abandoned Tanya's belongings and the van in another city, and managed to evade police for 30 years. In June 2019, William Talbot was convicted of double murder and sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. This became the first case where genetic genealogy secured a murder conviction. But his lawyers appealed, claiming juror bias. In 2021, his conviction was briefly overturned, granting him a retrial. However, in 2022, a higher court reinstated the conviction, and he remains imprisoned for life. To this day, detectives believe William may be connected to other unsolved crimes, given the brutality and sophistication of Tanya and Jay's murders. But no further links have been proven.